So it's time for the next part of linoleum carving, and that is carving the details. I started off carving the bolder areas here at the bottom, and then the top part is left blank because I know it's going to be a black space. Though I removed a lot of material at the bottom, these little ridges in between each carve mark could ink up. If they do ink up, this will create what we call chatter. It is not a big deal to have chatter. Again, the way that we carved, we were making sure that the chatter worked for our image. If you think about how you're printing, you're rolling the plate up and then you're using a circular motion to print. And sometimes that ink in those ridges will print on your paper. A lot of people think that carving down lower will prevent chatter, and that's not always the case. As you roll it through a press, you would create a ramp. It's carved so low that the roller of the press bed will jump up on it and still print that chatter. So again, carve it so that your fingernail will catch so that it's a little bit lower, and then make efforts to hide or avoid chatter if you do not like it, or accept chatter if you do. In truth, with this plate and its composition, I know that this bottom area is empty. So, in actuality, if I was doing this plate for my own work, I would just cut it all off if I did not like the chatter. So, to do that, I would just take my X-Acto knife and go around the image into the plate, scoring slowly, and then I would continue to score and score and score until I actually cut through the Hessian backing. The other thing I can do is just take a pair of scissors and cut that. Now I'm not actually going to cut my plate. I don't think it's necessary, as I want to showcase that chatter is okay in your image. But if you do find yourself running into chatter and disagreeing with it, simply cut that part of your plate out completely and chatter won't happen. That's about it on that particular subject. There are other ways to prevent it, what I'll show you later, but again, make it work for you and you'll find yourself in good hands. Alright, on to the actual bulk of this material. So, as I'm doing the details, I want to keep in mind that I still want to outline everything that is important. So I outlined the top of the burger already, and now I need to go to my gouge. I'm going to choose a V gouge. I particularly like it for really small details, but you might find the U gouge works a little better for you. Now, the reason I'm choosing a V gouge is because it comes to a point, which means anything I carve on the edge of that point will be incredibly thin, versus the U gouge, which is round. The rounded mark will give me a wider mark and won't be as thin, unless the gouge itself is thinner than the V gouge. So in this image, I've carved out the bright white here at the top, and then I didn't touch the deep black at the bottom. Those are two polar opposite points on the full grayscale spectrum, but it does not encompass the ability of us to talk about grays and neutrals in between those 2 points. In order to do that, we'll need to utilize any of our value techniques from pen and ink drawings or marker drawings. So in this area, I have a patty that I want to be dark, but not as dark as the shadow. So if I want to create a deep gray here, I need to utilize a bunch of moments of white. For me, that means that I could stipple in this area, which is creating these little bitty circular marks over and over again to create the illusion that it is gray here. If we take this black patty and add a bunch of moments of white, it'll visually appear grayer or lighter than an area that hasn't been touched at all. So I'm just going in and flicking my U gouge or V gouge over and over. I am rotating the order in which I flick and pop these marks out so that it randomizes the pattern. Overall, it'll give me this tone of grainy yet dark gray, which for a textured patty works really well. You might utilize other techniques such as hatching or cross hatching to talk about the values in between black and white. But you can still have a very good relief image if you only work with one color and you don't do any of these value techniques. As you need to check what you have carved, utilizing a Sharpie or dry erase or any type of marker and coloring in the area you previously carved or area you are intending to carve helps you see what you have done and will do. For some people, they take this step at the beginning and color their plate in with acrylic or using a marker. I like to do it to check regular intervals within my drawing. Particularly, I like to do it on areas where the image is going to be a white lined image. Again, that means that the image is primarily dark but has moments of white that have been carved out of it. Think of an X-ray versus a pen and ink drawing. If you want to see what you have carved, I would recommend using these Sharpie markers or dry erase or any marker that you have on hand. Even a pencil will do, as long as whatever you're doing is a darker shade than the linoleum itself. It also is very helpful for this thing to be a broad-tipped product, again, such as a marker. This makes sure that you don't fill in the mark you're trying to check. Alright, so previously we worked on talking about value during the stippling technique within the beef patty. But what if you don't like the organic pattern of the stippling technique and you still want to talk about value? Well, in the shadow here, I'm going to utilize a rigid hatching system to carve out a little bit of light to create a somewhat gradiating shadow. The first thing I'll need is a straight edge, and I'll need my X-Acto knife. And simply line up my X-Acto knife, pulling through the linoleum, just scoring it a little bit, and I'll give it a secondary score to make sure that it's deep enough. And then slowly I'll move my straight edge a little bit further away, creating a pattern of line that incrementally moves further and further apart. I will also remember that the density of these white lines creates more light. So more white equals more light. At the beginning, I will try to keep these white lines in a dense area, and as I get further and further away, it will appear like it's gradiating darker. But this is just a visual effect. The pattern will still be apparent. As I finish my first set of lines, I need to check to make sure that they're deep enough, but also when you're cutting with an X-Acto knife, it's incredibly thin, and sometimes it's hard to tell exactly where your lines are. This is a good way to double check them is by flexing your plate. While the lines that were created did go through the linoleum, it actually didn't carve out any material. You'll need to carve against the lines you just created. Again, no material was removed, and so technically the plate hasn't been carved at all with that first round of lines. By going the opposite angle to the line that we carved and flexing our plate a little bit, we can see the line that needs to be carved out. So think of it as the first knife lines created a border, and now you'll need to attack it from the other side, creating a V, which actually removes material. This will make it able to print the relief while having those little bitty lines. So now it's time for the important part of the carving, the details. As you remember, I already did some stippling in the patty area, some hatching work inside of the shadow, and you can consider doing some cross hatching also. But this image is more of a vector image for me, and so the little bitty shadow work and value work that I've done is enough. As far as the tools go, I'm always going to keep my X-Acto knife close. For me, this always helps with precision, and again, I would consider you doing it too. You'll find a variety of tools in your Linocutter, and as you go to more detailed work, you'll bounce between them all. Just remember to always push them away from yourself. Besides the X-Acto knife or the knife tool are the only tools that ever really come anywhere near you. If you practice safety and being careful and working slowly, you'll be fine. I am using a little bitty V-gouge, and a moment ago I showed a slip strop, which is just a honing or sharpening device, but at the rate that you will use these tools, you could consider not sharpening them, especially with the price that you're paying for them. In general, you'll just want to keep everything straightforward at this point. It is, for me, a black line carving now, which means I just need to carve everything but the black line itself. I'll bounce between tools to make sure I can do that most efficiently, but other than that, it's just a carve. Good luck.